Yeah, I'll get there. Cadmium is one of the most ecotoxic minerals in soils. And like I said, the dangers, like the ones that actually my colleague talked about it, that was in 2007. A consignment of South African pineapples was returned from Switzerland. And there was no any phytotoxic symptoms on the pineapples, but unfortunately when they were analyzed, when they got to Europe, they found high levels of cadmium. And when they were sent back to South Africa, we also found out that there was also an elevated amount of, was it mercury and lead in the pineapple. And fortunately for Europeans, they test everything from their crops. Unfortunately for South Africans, we consume without asking. Now, the second one that I will highlight is arsenic, which is a non-essential element to plants and animals. I don't know about humans or animals. I'm sorry, I'm not a specialist in that. But I know it's non-essential to plants. And it's also been classified as a carcinogenic by IRAC. And it's got a funny habit of accumulating in edible parts of the crop, other than the roots and flowers and the leaves. Excuse me. So that's why we consider arsenic to be a mineral of particular concern in fertilizers. And fortunately, you can see its presence in fertilizers or in soil, because it manifests itself in certain ways that you can see that this is a symptom of arsenic poisoning from the plant. Some of those include reduced plant growth and obviously decreased crop yield, and especially people who smoke, tobacco and cadmium and arsenic is one of, tobacco is known to accumulate cadmium and arsenic in big number, in huge quantities. Excuse me. Yes, we smoke nevertheless, but I don't. Now, chromium mostly it's found it's used in the leather tanning industry and in the colorants industry. I was listening to, was it Prof or was it someone who was talking before her, but they are both profs. Okay, they mentioned that they were showing, it's Rene who was showing colorful motifs there. For me, anything that is too colorful, I become suspicious of that thing, even in my house, because I know most colorants, they contain heavy metals in them. So I try as much as possible to avoid them. Chromium naturally is known to have two stable forms, that is hexavalent and trivalent chromiums, but the hexavalent chromium is known to be the most toxic ones. It does not happen too much in agriculture because that is usually the agricultural soil are well oxidated, yeah, and well aerated. And the other thing is it's usually localized around plant roots. It's not easily translocated to the shoots of plants. And there are plants that naturally have developed resistance against chromium, because in South Africa there are places where there's higher background chromium concentrations other than one would expect under normal circumstances. Those kind of plants have developed resistance to chromium toxicity. But it also affects crop yield, it affects human health, and it affects the economy. Mercury is another non-essential. A lot have been said about mercury before I came here, but it's usually used mainly in agriculture, in seed treatments. But you know, we have been trying to ban mercury containing products in South Africa. Unfortunately, some products, some wise South Africans go and bring banned substances through the back door in South Africa. You can police some of the things some of the time, and all of the things some of the time, but not all of the things all of the time. It is toxic to biota, fish, and terrestrial mammals, including humans. Now, these are essential elements that they are essential to plants, like I've mentioned before, but in higher quantities in the soil, they become toxic to plants, they become toxic to humans. Most metals, I think I left manganese there. Most metals, they become available in acidic soils. But as you move from acidic conditions to neutral conditions, they become less available, and ultimately they become unavailable in soils. And it also depends, like I said, on the temperature, the soil moisture conditions, and other conditions that might be other conditions that might affect their availability. That includes the availability of other metals because they interact in the soil. Now, like I said, when they enter the food chain through crop production, they become toxic to humans and animals. And selenium is a very important nutrient in alfalfa. Alfalfa is lucerne, but it can be toxic to other plants and humans. And people who apply it indiscriminately, who are producing lucerne, they might be creating a problem for future generations, to an extent that that soil might not be usable for other crops other than alfalfa. Nickel deficiency is a concern in pecan nuts, but it's not a big concern in other crops. So farmers who use nickel indiscriminately and in heavy amounts on pecan nuts, they might render the soil unusable for other crops in the future. Copper, iron, molybdenum are also essential nutrients, but they can end up in the food chain if they're used in huge quantities. Because these minerals, they are there. If you get an apple, you might get all of them, or almost all of them. But if you increase the concentration, they become a concern. And then there's a need to protect South African consumers from contaminated produce as much as exported products are. Now, that is part of our job. And so far, since the year 1947, we've been doing it, and hopefully we'll continue to do it diligently. Now, I just wanted to highlight on new developments before I conclude. The new developments in the fertilizer industry. I'm sorry I said the agriculture industry, but because the agriculture industry is massive, there are new molecules that are discovered on a daily basis. The other interesting one that we are still investigating since the drought in the Western Cape has been the use of potassium and sodium polyacrylates as water retentioners is gaining traction. I've been looking for specialists. Many universities, when we draft guidelines, we send them our guidelines. Unfortunately, we don't get any response from the universities. So we're appealing to universities to be part of our documents, because these are not our personal documents, they are national assets. And the other one is the use of controlled release fertilizer to increase the residency in the soil and reduce leaching and vaporization. Has anyone been to RTBS? If you have seen the plants that are growing, it's hyacinth plants that are growing in that dam, you'd be scared, because they grow under water conditions. That is because they get the nutrients that they want, because upstream there are agricultural activities and those nutrients have been washed away into the waterways, and they create the right conditions into the dam for the growth of those plants. It's hyacinth. And the other one is polymer-coated nitrogen, nutrient cycling, the usage of complexing and chelating agents, especially for metals, for better crop uptake and soil absorption. Banning of undesirable products in South Africa. Like I said, we are signatory to different international protocols and treaties, and as soon as a product is listed in a protocol, we try to ban it in fertilizers, in pesticides, and stock remedy. Stock remedy is animal medicine, so we try to ban it, those things. An example might be most PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and halogenated hydrocarbons, mostly they've been banned. They are under the Stockholm Convention. And lately we have also recognized nickel and silicon as essential elements to plant. Don't worry too much about these things like nickel and cobalt, because in the regulations we've got limits, and if one is going to apply it, there's a regulations that regulate the labeling. We look carefully into the label, that the amount that is recommended for application does not exceed the amount that is required by plant. But normally human beings are human beings. Now, in conclusion, I just want to say fertilizer form a very important part of food production and food safety in the country. Crop production activities, they mine important minerals out of the soil, which result in a need for the use of fertilizers. And mineral resources in South Africa, they are not finite. They are not finite. Am I right? They are finite. Yeah, because South Africa now, we don't have potassium deposits in South Africa. We only have phosphorus deposits that is mined by Fosco in Palabora, and even that at some point, sooner or later, is going to come to an end. So we have to use our resources carefully. But the use of fertilizers, the indiscriminate use of fertilizers, pose a health risk and environmental risk to our country. And there's a need to better regulate nitrogen fertilizers to avoid leaching and volatilization into the environment, which causes global warming. And organic fertilizers, they tend to be a hit or miss. And if they're poorly processed, they may not function. Otherwise, the costs go higher and higher with the quality of product that you get in the market. Now, as other people was presenting, I noted some things that I felt like I must also say something about them. Like, I noted that endocrine disruptors it's something that we must think about including in our guidelines and the regulations. We do have some endocrine disruptors, but maybe we need to be a little bit bigger. We need to increase the list to be longer. And the other challenge was microplastics, which is the new development in the industry. We need to see how we're going to manage this thing. But ultimately, the development of new technologies and innovation is very difficult to regulate, because these things, they keep popping all the time. And nanotechnology is one of the things that we have had to deal with recently in fertilizers. One company wanted to register nano-fertilizers, and we didn't like it, so we rejected the application because there was no enough risk assessment on the product. And the last one I wanted to talk about is antibiotics. In the fertilizer industry and the pesticide industry, more especially in the pesticide industry, we realize the risk of the use of antibiotics. And can I bring it to your attention that we regulate anything that is agriculture related, so long as it's not regulated by the Medicine Act. So as soon as we realize that it's regulated by the Medicine Act, we don't go there, because we realize the risk that might be a backdoor, because it's going to take one wise professor to take an antibiotic, reformulate it, and want to register it as a biostimulant or as a pesticide. And the effects might be catastrophic to the country, because now if you are exposed to that antibiotic, you are going to develop resistance to it over time. If it's sprayed on cabbage, you eat the cabbage, you are going to develop resistance to those kind of antibiotics. But we are humans, we are fallen, we do mistakes. But we believe that our regulations, they are fair and fairly watertight, not too watertight, but there's room for improvement. Thank you.